Start working. It's recording. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Burning with G, welcome back. Episode 19. I have my friend Choksi once again on the show. How are you doing
everybody.
today, sir?
I'm doing great. How about you?
I've been pretty good. I got the new setup. How'd you like it so far?
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
It's easier. I can definitely. I don't have to have the one mic that barely catches two people's sounds anymore. So this is significantly nicer.
Yeah.
Can you actually hear my water bottle?
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so let's see. What I want to talk about today was punishment. So, started applying to schools, and I am right now applying mainly to analysis of public policy majors, and I am enthralled, and I am actually in shock at the kind of crazy stuff that a lot of people have been researching, and especially when it comes to education. One of the most interesting things that I personally found is studying if detentions and suspensions is actually a useful method.
Yeah.
And so that got me thinking. I was just like, okay, so punishment has been a huge part of our lives, you know? We're kind of just conditioned like animals to act in a certain way. You do a good job, here, you get an extra snack. You do a bad job, I'm going to smack you with the back of my hand. And you're kind of just conditioned in so many ways as we grow up to doing things just for other people. So now it's like, looking back at it, I'm like, how much of who I am today is actually because I chose to be that person, and how much of it is because it's been conditioned by society and other people, right? So I kind of have now been trying to slowly retrace my steps and figure out what's truly me and what's really somebody else. So what is some of, we did a little bit of quick reading on punishment. First off the bat, what are some of your thoughts when it comes to just punishment in general?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, one thing I actually read was about, like, parenting and how parents punish their children. And I think, especially, like, the joke is with brown people, they always say, like, white people beat your kids. But, people say if you don't punish your children enough, then they won't be disciplined. They're kind of become these bratty kids that they'll throw a tantrum anytime something doesn't go their way. And I actually saw...
you don't talk that loudly. Sorry.
I saw, like, some research about... like different forms of what parents did and how well they worked. And then like a couple of really popular forms of punishment that I found out about is, so the number one was actually compromise, where it's, if you do this or if you behave, then I'll give you this later. And that's the most effective in the short term, but actually it'll spoil your kid in the long term. So that's something that is really effective if you use it every once in a while. And then another one is called reasoning, where you kind of tell your child, like, this is wrong because this person's feelings get hurt, or that's not the right way to treat people. And then that is actually the best way to treat your kids in the long term. And then the third one was like timeouts and punishments. And that's, I think the statistic I saw is if you use that less than 16% of the time, it's like very effective.
Really?
But yeah. That was kind of just a quick read that I saw online.
Cool. Could you go over the second one again? I kind of missed that one again.
So the second one is reasoning, where it's more like,
explaining
if your kid hits another kid and say, like, imagine if someone hit you and it hurt a lot. Like, would you like that or would you not? Like, if you wouldn't like it, then why would you do it to them?
Okay. So I guess, like, reasoning is an interesting one because I feel like that's kind of difficult to get across with older people. In that, put yourself in that position. How would you like it?
What if someone robbed you while they were armed?
Yeah, so that is interesting. Okay, so I guess that's more focused towards younger children.
That's towards a younger audience.
Okay,
yeah.
Cool. Yeah, because I wanted to touch really quickly on what detention really even is, right? So you mess up in school, you do something you're not supposed to do. They're like, hey, you have to stay in school for 1 hour longer. So that, first of all, it's built on the assumption that being at school sucks, which is probably a problem. Like ideally you want it to be in a place where people kind of look forward. If what your punishment is to stay in school for another hour longer, where you're just doing homework and stuff, ideally that's not that bad.
Yeah.
So, but obviously it is, to the point where people don't really want to go. So there's a whole other issue there. But one thing that I never understood was suspensions, especially. It's like, okay, I'm disrupting because I don't like being in school. So you're going to give me what I want and tell me not to come to school? Like, that just doesn't make sense to me. So I'm like, I feel like those punishments only work on students who genuinely feel something from those punishments. Like when I was in middle school and I'd get a detention, I felt bad.
Yeah.
But after a while, when it was just like, okay, I gotta do something now. So then it loses that entire, like, kind of the essence of the punishment itself, right? So I saw this one thing online about how a school implemented like a yoga practice where every time you got in trouble, you just went for an hour after school and did yoga. Which as a high schooler, you're probably like, I'm not really trying to do this, but I feel like it probably made a huge difference in each of those people's lives where it's like they actually had time to relax. You know, as opposed to where when we had detention in our school, we just kind of got sent to the room and what's it called SRC.
Yeah,
SRC, and everyone would just be on their phone.
Yeah,
You know, at which point it's
sneakily
like,
trying to go on their phone
Yeah.
without trying to get caught.
Yeah.
And like,
at which point there's no rehabilitation and there's no actual gain from doing that. So it's
Yeah.
like, what do you think could have been a few ways our school could have maybe implemented? We can think about it for a brainstorm for a little bit. Just ways that, you know, could have been more efficient.
hmm. I don't know, that's a hard question.
It is. One thing I think that didn't work for me a lot was like the idea of like a teacher being there kind of like punishing you. You know? Where it was like, for one, each person who's in that detention room could be there for a different reason. It was never
Yeah.
like for, you know, the same reason. It could really be for arbitrary reasons. I could have been late to school 3 times and been there. Or I could have like punched somebody and been there, you know? So it's like, it didn't really seem that like the way they treated everybody as if they were a criminal sometimes. It felt kind of odd to me. You know, it was just like, why is it not looked at? It didn't have to be looked at in such a negative way, you know? Because sometimes when you walk in there, teachers would look at you and be like, oh, what'd you do this time to get detention? You know, where it wasn't really like kind of kind. And you genuinely felt like a bad kid for being there. Which I feel like that, now as I grow up, I'm understanding more how like somebody's vision of you really changes the way you act. Like, and that's been huge for me recently. Like I realized when I come home, like you kind of, if somebody holds you in a high light, you tend to like act in a better way because you don't want to let them down.
Yeah.
But if these teachers are looking at you like a bad student or like a bad kid, then it's like you have no reputation to hold, you have nothing, and you're like, all right, I will be exactly what you think of me as a bad person, you know?
Sure, sure.
And I think that like that assertion that detention means bad is just, you may have done a bad thing, but that doesn't mean you're a bad person, you know? And I feel like that was one thing that I never really liked about detention, you know? But yeah, what are some other things you think?
Yeah, I mean, in high school, a lot of it was, I mean, whenever people do bad things, then they always get punished, and then whenever you get good grades, then they get rewarded. So there was like a very specific mold of people that kind of they do well in high school, I guess, when they just do grades, they keep their heads straight, and they don't like stray away from the good high school student kind of mold. But I mean, the people that stray away, I think there's a lot of people that just kind of get failed by the system because, I mean, they're the people who are just going to get suspended, they're going to get detentions, and because of that, they're just going to grow to dislike the school more and more, and that's not going to help them, like, shift their path. So I think, I mean, something we were talking about earlier is this whole concept of rehabilitation versus punishment. And in high school, I think that's like one of the best places where rehabilitation should be focused more rather than punishment. Because I mean, like, they're just kids at the end of the day. If they make a mistake, then that's all the more reason for you to try and push them to the right direction gently and in a way that, you know, might give them that spark that they get excited for learning again.
That's true, and I think you mentioned a really interesting word in mold, right?
Yeah.
Where we were talking earlier, like conditioning, molding is kind of what the entire essence of that process is. So I think what's the coolest part of punishment is trying to understand what that mold exactly is. You know, so let's just think a little bit. What do you think is that mold that people want from a high school student? Is it obedient? And I think sometimes that word is very dangerous. You know, it's like you kind of want these like docile, obedient students who like listen to everything that the adults say, and they're just like, yes sir, yes ma'am. Like it's no like. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely one of the biggest things, obedient, and like not necessarily very free thinking, but more like studious, you know, like here's the material, study it. If you follow like the teacher's instructions and you work hard, then you can get good grades and then you can live a happy life. Like it's a very like one-dimensional kind of mold that they set for you. And I think even like when like lots of public schools were established dates back to the Industrial Revolution when they were actually trying to get people to be factory workers, right? And like factory workers are not expected to be free and independent thinkers. those are people who you pretty much want them to follow your instructions, you know, like pull this lever, press this button, and do that all day, and then you'll get your wage, and then you're done. So you're kind of trying to generate people who will work well in a machine, not people who are going to build a new machine.
That's interesting. That's a good ass point though. Because I know like the one part of contrast I always have is with what my dad talks about how school was in India, and it seems like that's kind of their main goal there, where they're teaching you repetition, they're teaching you like monotonous lessons where you just learn how to repeat things. They teach you a program, you memorize not how the program works, but you memorize literally how to rewrite the exact program for what it is. Where you do create these kind of like robots, you know. But my dad would always say that the schools here try to be different from that, but in the way we're talking about it right now, it doesn't seem to be that different, you know.
Yeah.
Because I think that is a very important point to make, that a lot of times rule breakers or people who are considered bad is where a lot of like creative and like, I'm trying to think of the word,
kind of untapped potential.
exactly, and just and ideas that aren't necessarily the norm, you know, because it's like that's where all those things will kind of cultivate and create, which is why like art and a lot of those things will commonly be created by outsiders or people who don't really feel part of the in group, you know. So I think by neglecting those people, you do end up with a bunch of sheep and a lot less people who are capable of doing things that are not considered the norm. So there needs to be some sort of way where you're able to rehabilitate them, but at the same time, like, let them have those traits that make them different, you know, as long as it's not like impacting others. So that's where it gets tricky, because rehabilitation, in another word, is kind of just indoctrinating you with ideas to be how I want you to be. So that's also not good. So that's where it gets kind of confusing between what.
And I mean, just like another quick point about school before we move on to more talk about punishment, I think I personally am really hopeful for how technology can impact our schools in the future. I really think one problem with school right now, like even if we try and fix it and whatnot, is just the whole system of having 30 people in one classroom that have to go at the same pace, right? With all the technology we have today, we really need to be adapting to every single child's needs. Some kids may be fast in some areas and slow in other areas and vice versa. And if we're able to actually be in a place where we don't lose a student because, you know, they're a little bit behind in math, so they just kind of, it's a snowball effect, right? If you're behind in class 1 year, then you're just going to be behind in math for the rest of your thing until maybe you magically catch up because you have a great tutor or something or the other. So if, you know, maybe it's some kind of special scenario where everyone has their own headset, like some VR headset. You have a teacher who's there to like facilitate the classroom, but they kind of get to like, for 30 minutes or something, they just go on their headset and then they do whatever the thing that thinks that they're ready for. And then after that, you know, you can have like a group session where you talk about things, where you socialize a little bit. I think that would be a much better and more modern solution for classrooms than what we have today.
I do like that. That's actually what I wrote one of my papers on, was for my application, is in the work that I was doing at my lab at the neuroengineering place. The main work that they were doing there was first analyzing what type of students were on the ADHD spectrum, and then focusing on catered activities to try to improve their focus and concentration. So I wrote my paper basically on having this process where you actually partition students off based on exactly what you were saying, but instead of just like my capability, my neurological, what's going on in my brain, which talks more about the capability of me to learn. So I could be great at math this year, but that doesn't mean that the way my brain processes, I could fall behind in 2 years from now. You know, and I think that's one of the things that's missed on a lot. Just because I'm keeping up with the material right now does not mean I can continue that same rate of learning for the rest of my life. It could be distractions from, you know, the external world. It could be a lot of things that happen that it mentally slow me down in terms of learning. So I was like, okay, and I think your idea of the virtual reality would be really cool, where you can kind of just go to school from home. That would be nice. So I feel like partitioning students off based on their neurological needs would be the next step eventually where we go. Because you're right, by doing it in 30 people, like, you will have people who are completely behind and you'll have people who are way ahead. You know? So I have another question to ask you about that, actually. So one of the things that they are also studying in education is it helpful to be pushed, or is it better to be with your peers, or are you being slowed down if you're ahead? So that's like one thing that I think is super important when you're thinking about school. So for those people who are above, way higher than school, I feel like for those people, they're being significantly slowed down.
Yeah.
You know, because like I remember in kindergarten, first grade, like I was really good at math. I was significantly ahead of all my students, but then you end up slowing down, you know, just because like for years you're kind of just going at a slower pace where you're not keeping up that original boost that you had, you know, and I feel like that happens to a lot of us where we eventually get slowed down to kind of meet the norm. So I know you went to Challenger at first.
Yeah.
Was their curriculum sped up from when you went to public school after?
Yeah, no, it was definitely sped up. And actually, it was maybe even a little bit too fast for me. So what happened was I was always like technically a year ahead in classes, but then I was like an average student in those classes. You know, I was never like exceptional ahead. Like I would get like a B plus in the classes, but like a year earlier. So, you know, maybe it would have been better if I just like took a little bit more time and then really got a better mastery of all the subjects. So, again, right, every student is gonna have their own pace, and I guess another factor is like you also like you want to push students a little bit past their comfort zone, but if you push them too far, then they're gonna just grow a distaste for that subject.
True.
So you need to find that gray area.
And that's a power of, you know, that is ideally what type of teachers you'd want, you know, who are capable of understanding what each student needs and being able to cater to kind of help all of them, which is almost impossible with 30 students. That's
definitely.
So I think the class size is a really good point you make, and I hope they figure something else about that. So moving back to punishment though, because I do think, for me at least, since I have never been to prison or anything, my biggest encounter with punishment has been in school, right?
Same.
So some of the things that I was reading was, did you read a little bit about the history of punishment by any chance?
No.
Okay, so I was kind of reading, I know you brought up like Industrial Revolution, but I know they were talking about how when it first started. So I'm trying to recollect what I was reading. It was kind of blurry on it, but let's see. It was really cool though. I was reading about it, I was like, damn, this is nuts. So I think they were talking about the need for punishment. Let me try to remember. I'll try to come back to that. What did you read up? Where did you get from that?
Okay, so one thing I've always considered pretty interesting is like this concept of capital punishment, right? That, you know, if you murder someone else, then you know it's gonna be a public spectacle, and then they're just gonna cut your head off at the guillotine as punishment. So it's like a death for a death. And I think, in essence, like that's like pretty much like the ultimate punishment, right? Just kill that person. And I think that's like the total opposite of what prison should be. Because if you're gonna keep someone alive, right, and you don't want to just give them the ultimate punishment, then that means to some extent you believe that that person can reform. So I feel that if you're making the choice to not like kill someone as punishment, then you're kind of invested in improving them and reintroducing them to society. So I think just off the basis of not performing capital punishment, there should be some kind of rehabilitation going on in the prisons.
Okay, that makes sense. While you were saying that, it just clicked in my head. But I was listening, and then it clicked. I was like, bling. So this was really interesting to me. So they're talking about how at first, the entire system of punishment was just writing down what offenses were not allowed to be committed. But at some point in history, it changed to where punishment was writing what you're not allowed to do to the offender. So there's a huge difference there. For a while, like let's say you stole or you lied, any punishment was allowed to be given to you. But only after a while were the rights of the people being punished more focused on. And that's where we are now, where it's like you're not focused so much more on what crimes are not allowed to be committed, but we're more focused on how much can we punish this person, you know, to try to keep it like it correlates with the severity of their crime. So I think that was pretty interesting, where it was like, that is an interesting shift, you know?
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty reasonable. Like, someone who shoplifts shouldn't be given the same amount of punishment as someone who, like, shoots a crowd of hundreds of people.
Yeah.
It's definitely important that we evaluate the criminals correctly based on the scale of their crime.
But that's where it's a ton of gray area.
Yeah.
You know? And I feel like
it's hard to say.
The problem with these type of things is you're judging what is happening to another human being, so you better not be wrong. You know? And I think that's why one of the cool things I like is, I forgot what the words are, but you know how like there's like type 1 error, type 2 error?
Yeah.
And like, I believe the prison system is based on a type 2 error where it's like now you believe it's innocent until proven guilty.
Yeah.
So it's like you rather have people who are guilty be free than have innocent people in jail, which is an important distinction to make. You know, and I'm glad that it's that way. But I think one thing that's interesting is a lot now people are saying that it's slowly shifting where people are like, hey, if a woman comes out about rape or something, you should automatically believe them. Where I was reading this article about how like we're moving into a place where it's actually really dangerous, where we're not going with the innocent until proven guilty method anymore. It's like if someone comes out about some sort of crime, you know, whether it's a racial crime, whatever, there's a whole list of them. People automatically assume that they're guilty now, you know, and I've heard that people voice their fears of what that could actually mean for the future. But there's like a lot of like little things here and there that have to do with crime, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so firstly, I mean, just tying back to what you were saying about like the error innocent until proven guilty, that's actually the reason why, like, as of late, there's been very few incidents of the death penalty being given in the U.S. So what happened is like there's been a couple of incidents where someone was given the death penalty, and then later on some new technology gets discovered, and then they find out that they were actually wrong and they killed someone innocent. And after like a couple incidents like that, even some of the biggest proponents of the death penalty have kind of backed away from it. And we're definitely moving away from that entire methodology. But what you're saying about like how in our culture today that innocent until proven guilty is kind of dying out, and I definitely see that today there's more of these almost like social media trials where like Twitter or Instagram is judge, jury, and executioner. Like there will be kind of an outrage after something happens, and then before the facts are presented, then a conclusion will be made. And again, this is not to say that anyone who makes the accusation is wrong. It's just to say that whatever like law and court and whatever it usually has to happen in a proper sorry, I'm fucking losing all my words.
No, it's okay.
But
no, I get what you're saying though. Like
yeah, like the proper proceedings need to happen before a conclusion is made in an actual court of law. Is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. And another important thing is if we have trust in our court of law, then whatever is being passed there should be what people are normally like agreeing with, you know? And I think like by having that disparaging of like people's satisfaction with what is actually, there's an issue there, you know, because you can't have the law saying one thing and then everybody acting as if that isn't real or that wasn't true. You know? Yeah, because I think that's what I have like 2 friends now who just taken the bar, and like I love talking to lawyers because I'm like, you guys are actually in this, you know, like their entire life is just studying ethics, like that's all it is, because it's like, what are people supposed to do versus what they aren't supposed to do, you know? And I think one of the things I personally find the most interesting is law basically says what you can't do, not what you shouldn't do, and I think there's a huge difference between those two, because you can prescribe or subscribe to somebody, you can be like, hey, like you probably shouldn't do X, Y, and Z. You probably shouldn't lie, you probably shouldn't steal. What the government does is it comes in and says, okay, if you do these things, you will literally be punished for them, but these other set of acts you can do and get away with it. We won't actually punish you for it. So I think that line that they drew is also very interesting to study. Like, where exactly are they drawing that line? Why is it okay for me to, why is it okay for me to lie, but I can't steal? Like, you know, where is the difference between those two?
Yeah, I think, so I actually studied this a while back, and like a long time ago when they were still trying to create justice systems, there was this concept called British common law. And there was like 2 core principles. One is that you shouldn't harm other individuals, and another is that you shouldn't harm other individuals' property. And those were like the 2 like fundamental things that were the basis for the laws in that time. So, I mean, that honestly makes a lot of sense. Like, if you think about most of the crimes you can think of, it pretty much boils down to those 2 things. Maybe individual can be replaced by like corporation or company now, because of like the world we live in. But I think like those are 2 pretty fair points, right? As a society, if someone does follow the laws, then I think it's a society's duty to protect them from people who don't follow the laws.
Interesting.
And I think by following those 2, that's like a pretty fair start.
Yeah. Yeah, because one thing I do want to talk to you about, it is a little controversial. What are your thoughts on the right to like own a gun, for example? What are your thoughts on that?
Um, I don't feel too strongly either way on that one, to be honest. I mean, I am behind, like, say, like, having to go through whatever, more processes if you want to own a gun, like, you need to go through, like, mental evaluations and XYZ. But also at the same time, I do believe that, like, the concept of owning a gun, I think seems fair enough to me, but then, like, what happens in reality, I've heard that something like in robberies, where, like, the owner of the house has a gun, like, in, like, 50 or 60% of situations, the gun ends up getting turned against them.
That's kind of funny.
So, like, the thing is, like, just owning a gun, you might, like, feel like it's like your comfort blanket or something, but it doesn't actually mean anything. Like, if you're not ready to actually pull the trigger and shoot another human being, like, you're actually better off not owning a gun.
Yeah.
So.
But I think the argument isn't, like, rationally who should and shouldn't have a gun.
Yeah.
Right? Because I feel like the proponents for banning the gun is just, like, literally no. Even if you have a rational reason to own a gun.
You shouldn't own a gun.
Yeah.
Yeah. So. Yeah. I don't know. It's hard for me to take a strong side on either side.
Cause I think that's where the line between shouldn't and can't.
Yeah.
Because, like, I can personally argue why people shouldn't own guns.
Yeah.
But that's different than saying why you
can't own a gun.
Cannot own a gun. And I think that's where I personally have an issue with it. Like, I totally agree with all the reasons why someone shouldn't have a gun.
Yeah.
But people misdrew that those two arguments are the same. Same with abortion. Like, you can totally have if you believe in God and all this, and you want to argue why people shouldn't have abortions, you totally can. But that does not equate to why someone can't have a baby.
Abortion.
And I think, like, that conversation needs to be had more. Like, why is my shouldn't equal to your can't? And I think I would love to, engage in that type of conversations more, because I think that's where the answer of all these things lie.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily like, by me arguing my rationality for why people shouldn't own guns, I'm not actually saying, we're not talking about anything actually. Because we will totally disagree. You can totally tell me 10 points why people should own guns, and I can tell you why people shouldn't. But that's not what the argument actually is.
Yeah, the argument is whether you can or can't.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a really interesting distinction that you drew there.
Yeah. But yeah, so that's something I notice a lot between. That's what I think about this, like, politics right now. I feel like people are arguing two different sides altogether with healthcare, everything. They're not. Everyone's arguing why they believe what they believe.
Yeah.
But that's only, like, one part of the argument. The second part is, like, why is what I believe what you should follow? I'm allowed to believe what I want, and I can even have hundreds of rational reasons for why I believe what I believe. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you should, like, think of what I say as fact. I think that's, like, something that I personally am having a hard time kind of following with politics. I hate politics. Right? I used to like politics, but, like, now it just makes me really, like, I'm just like, these are the people leading us. Like, why?
Yeah, I mean, I can get behind that. I've pretty much just isolated. I just try not to, like, get into discussions about them, especially with people who I know I'm just gonna disagree with.
Disagreeing, yeah.
It's really hard to just disagree in politics nowadays.
Yeah. In, like, a healthy way.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so let me think what else I read about punishment that I thought was cool. Oh, so this is something I was thinking about. I was like, okay, let's say there's 50 of us, okay?
Yeah.
And we're all creating our own government or something. And we're the ones who are actually writing down which acts are good and which acts are bad. What do you think some of the things that we'd consider would be? I was thinking about that. I was like, okay, like, we're, like, on Lord of the Flies or something.
Yeah.
We're on an island and we're drawing our own government now. It's like, what type of acts would we... okay, so this is something I think is very interesting. People assume that... I think there's a biological law that plays a role too. So what I mean by that is that even if you removed all cops, I don't think I'd just go around killing people. I don't think the law is what prohibits me from killing another person. I think there's, like, an inherent thing in my brain that's like, don't kill this person, don't rape this person. I don't think it's like, oh, if you remove the laws, then all hell breaks loose, I'm gonna do anything.
Yeah.
And I think what needs to be said also is that I feel like a lot of people fear this, like, world where everyone's just walking around killing and raping each other if you remove laws. And I don't know 100% if that's the world that it would turn into.
Yeah, so I mean, actually, if you look at smart primates, like, thinking maybe orangutans or, like, one of those, like, really smart monkeys, they actually like they have small colonies of like maybe like 40 to 50 monkeys, like something kind of similar to the experiment you're talking about. And actually what they do is like they'll have like an alpha male as like the leader, and what they do is they don't just fight it out for who's like the more alpha person. What they do is they garner support from all the other monkeys in the colony, and what they do is like they'll do a favor, they'll give this monkey a berry, they'll groom their child, and basically in order to try and overtake someone as the alpha of the colony, they try and get more support from more of the monkeys.
Wow.
And that's like, they don't have like a law system, they don't have a justice system, that's just like literally monkeys do that, right? So at the same time, that's also a very small scale of 50 monkeys. I think the law becomes much more important in a society of millions of people where a single outlier could just go around and start shooting and robbing and raping people. That's when like, you need protection from that outlier. If I'm following all laws of the society, I need to know that, if there is that random person, then there's a system in place that'll protect me from that.
That makes sense. Because you ideally don't want people like that around you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
You need that sense of safety, right? Like, why shouldn't I do it?
Yeah.
Right? If someone else could just do it.
Yeah. Safety. I think that's a big one. Like, people want to feel safe, so they're going to instill the laws that they think will make them feel the most safe,
Yeah.
Damn. I think it's so tricky because it's like, I wonder what life would be like if there were no laws. What type of things, would people really commit some sort of purge, or would people just continue living the same way? Like, are people like, do people act in a certain way only because the law prohibits them from acting in a different way? Like, if it is, that's kind of nuts, Like,
I mean, it's hard to say without living in that society.
Yeah.
But I mean, all I would say is if there weren't laws, then I would be much happier about my right to own a gun.
Yeah. That's true. That's interesting. Damn. Yeah, it's crazy how like we started from, that's what we started with,
Yeah.
There were like 100 people that were on boats. They said we're starting over, came to this place and basically created everything we live in from that.
Yeah.
It's nuts. Yeah, I think the people who wrote the Constitution and stuff, like, think about how crazy you have to be, like, to be able to think that far ahead and be like, alright, these are the things we're going to create this entire country off of. And it's a paper that we still listen to.
Yeah.
That's pretty impressive. I think they got a few things right where they really prided freedom.
Yeah.
I think that, like, honestly, people sleep on them, like a lot of them were definitely slave owners and did a lot of fucked up things, but they were definitely ahead of their times in, like, understanding that freedom is the one thing that everybody needs.
Yeah, and I mean, I think part of that was the fact that like a lot of them were leaving their homes because they were being persecuted, like religious persecution, this or that. So that's why when they come here, that's when they say, okay, we want freedom of speech, we want freedom of religion. That crowd of people they went through something, and they wanted to make sure that in their homeland that no one would ever have to go through that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, because we sleep on it all the time, like freedom doesn't, that's the most interesting thing to me, like freedom doesn't mean anything until it's taken
you don't
away
have
from
it.
You, so it's like, I've had it my whole life, I can say anything I want, I can do anything I want, I don't know what being controlled feels like,
Yeah, I mean, there's actually a funny saying that's like, Americans will cross the ocean to fight for the right of the vote, but they won't cross the street to vote.
Oh, that's so funny.
Yeah.
Damn. Interesting. Where'd you hear that? That's an interesting one. That's
So
funny.
whenever you die in Call of Duty, it shows you quotes.
Oh, really? That's such an insult to have on there.
Yeah.
Everybody else is playing the game like stupid Americans. Yeah, no, but let's see. Punishment. You got anything else that you thought of?
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about the prison system in Norway for a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think we touched on that yet. But basically, there's like a prison in Norway that if anyone from America, like any American prison warden went there, they just like, their jaw would drop. It seems like a total luxury prison. And basically, they live like, it's almost like an apartment. And the only actual punishment that they're receiving in that prison is that they don't have their freedom. Like, they can't go out and just do whatever they want. They're stuck in that prison. But I mean, they can live a decent life in the prison. They're not at all treated like animals, which is what's said to happen a lot in American prisons. And another thing, in Norway, is they focus a lot on rehabilitation. So the maximum sentence is 21 years. And this is actually something that actually people in America were outraged about. There was someone who killed like hundreds of people in a bombing in Norway, and he got 21 years only.
Wow.
And then people literally, they did the math, they're like, oh, so that means he's basically only serving 10 minutes for each person that he killed. But like to people in Norway, they were okay with that because I mean that's just the system that they were raised in. And there's a statistic, they call it like recidivism, I think, which is like how likely people are to go back to prison after they leave. And in Norway, only 20% return, and in America, we have one of the highest. It's around like 80%.
Yeah, I saw that.
So that's like something to really consider. You know, in Norway they accept that it is a rehabilitation system, and eventually those people are gonna roam the streets again. So off the bat, they want to treat them like humans and try and get them back on track as soon as possible. And they're ready to, you know, forgive their sins, however bad they were. In America, we don't have that same like sentiment that we're ready to say, okay, this person killed hundreds, we're ready to like try and fix it. No, we're like, no, we want this guy punished. We want him to be like you know, stuck in jail and like shit conditions for a long time. Like he has to suffer for what he did.
That is interesting.
So we're gonna like, while you know it might be nice to want that system in Norway, we're also gonna have to adopt their same level of forgiveness for those.
And I think one bringing up the recidivism rate is a huge thing, because it's like that will increase the trust that people have in the prison system. If you really believe that once you go to prison, the type of people that come out could be even better than the people who never went, then you have a feeling of trust of prisoners. You know, where now it's like, you know, they didn't really learn anything in prison, and when they come out, it's like, I have no trust for you still. You know, which kind of really shows something about how we trust the prison system as a whole.
Yeah, and that must even affect like the prisoner's psyche as well, right? As a prisoner, when you go into prison and you hear all these shitty ass things about prison, you're not gonna go in thinking like, oh, I'm gonna reform you. You're gonna think like, God damn, I hope I make it up. Like, as opposed to in Norway, right? You go in, like you hear like, okay, yeah, you know, like maybe this is how I'll move on.
Like get better, because at the end of the day, everyone wants to do better. I think that's important. Like no one actually, maybe people do, but I have this faith in humanity that people aren't inherently that evil.
Yeah.
You know, and I forgot who was saying this. I thought it was very interesting.
Like a philosopher, John Locke, maybe?
No. I was the next thing I'm gonna say. I think it was Harcourt, maybe. But she was talking about how there's a difference between where you think human beings originally start from. So do you think human beings, as soon as they're born, are good, neutral, or bad? And I was like, that's interesting. Like, some people genuinely believe that humans, as in their essence, are quote-unquote good. And other people believe you're neutral, and based on your acts or your thoughts, you can then gain some sort of positive or negative value from there.
Yeah.
So I thought that was very interesting.
I mean, I think I would say neutral, because I think like good and evil are like inherently human concepts.
Yeah.
You'll never see like an animal in the wild and call it good or evil, right? It's just living.
Very true. Yeah.
So that's something
that's a really good point.
That's something that we inscribe upon ourselves. So I think you kind of have to say like, as an animal, when you're born, without having any impression of society yet, you were just a neutral entity, and then based on your environment in which you grow, like whatever impression it has on you, you'll turn into like a quote unquote good or a good quote unquote evil person.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Definitely. No, honestly, I feel like one thing that, so I saw this quote. You want to close the window behind you real quick, just because. You just gotta push it in. You can probably open this big thing up. Thank you. Yeah. So one thing that I heard was they had a research study where they wanted to test how confident people were in themselves. So they asked about driving. Do you think you're better than the average driver? And 80% of people thought they were better than the average driver. And I would fall into one of those.
Yeah.
Because you hear so much of people who get tickets, who get into crashes and things like that, you believe that, hey, if I just don't, you know...
If I haven't done that,
then I must be a good driver, right? But the thing is, like, most people have never gotten those things. Most people have not gotten ticket after ticket after ticket, and they are fine drivers. But that's what I feel like being good kind of also feels like, where it's like, this system validates majority of people. Where like you're like, hey, I never gone to jail, I never killed anyone, I never raped anybody, I'm good. You get that lucky feeling of good, but it's only the people who've gone through that who have to deal with the huge repercussions of feeling bad by society. You know, but they have to feel it so much worse, where we can just kind of put our nose high and be like, I'm a good person, you know? Which is why when you mentioned that, I was like, oh my god, like I'm actually not a good person. Like, I've attributed myself to good for my whole life. Like, I've never thought I was a bad person, but you're right, that like literally like to really understand that, hey, like when I look at a cat, I don't think of a good cat or a bad cat. In the same way as an animal, I'm not a good person or a bad person, I'm literally just a person. But it's like you tend to attribute yourself with good characteristics so much that it's like just you forget.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Well, so I think people who say that humans are intrinsically evil are like, the claim is more that if someone were to act in their pure animal state within a society, then we would consider that a bad person.
Mm.
Because, you know, they might just walk around, knock down someone's door, ooga booga, take a banana and leave, right? Because they're like, I mean, shit, I'm hungry.
Yeah.
So, like, to someone who's never seen, like, an animalistic human, they're like, oh, this guy's evil. Like, what is he doing?
Mm.
And then because of that, they say that we need laws so that people don't do that. And they get out of that animalistic state.
That makes sense. And I have heard, like, the farther and farther we've gone from that quote-unquote... That's what, like, in one of those papers I was reading, they were literally referring to that as the savage state, which is pretty interesting. But I think it's just hard the farther we get away from that state to ever understand what it was like when we were there.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like, as we get more sophisticated, laws just kind of seem like they're just there.
Yeah.
But
we don't understand where they came from.
Why they're important until like you get back to that original state, which is why I feel like it is important to like somehow experience that. You know, I feel like being thrown on an animal and understanding what the capabilities of humans are will allow you to like really understand like how crazy what we live in is now. You know, like like I always wondered. I was like, dude, I wish what happened to Tom Hanks in Castaway was real. Like, I really want to talk to somebody like that. It's like, hey, like, after being stranded for 20, 30 years, like, coming back to society, like, what does this stuff look like to you? You know? It's like, we're so preoccupied with so much bullshit. Like, and one of those things is, like, this feeling of good. Like, I feel like when you're just experiencing nature, like, raw like that, like, you're not really thinking about stupid things. Like that.
You're thinking about survival.
Yeah, there's no, like, I'm a good person, I'm a bad person. I'm just I'm just alive. You know? And I think that humbles you a lot. You know, I feel like this concept of, you know, and I think that's a thing about punishment. It pushes you in a direction where you start doing it to other people then. You know, like through my words, I have conditioned so many people around me, you know, to where like if I think something you do is not cool, then you voice it. In a way you're punishing somebody for being, like when you're just you, people punish you to be like this person that they want you to be. So whether it's through words, whether there's just so many ways that this type of conditioning happens, you know?
Yeah.
And I think like one thing I would eventually want to pass down if I ever have children or something is like, to some extent you really just have to let people be. Like you cannot say any, like, but sometimes even the smallest things, like let's say I don't like your outfit.
Yeah.
Like even expressing that, let's say you really fuck with you, let's say you never asked for my opinion.
Yeah.
Me expressing that I don't like your outfit in a subtle way is like, hey, like I want you, in my head, people who dress nicely dress like this. You're not doing that. Switch a little. You know, even that in the slightest way, I don't tell you like your makeup, whatever it is, you know, it's like, and I feel like that's really just dangerous. I think a lot of people have been conditioned in such a way where like eventually you're like, I don't even know who I am anymore. Like I don't even know why I like these things. I just do. Yeah. You're kind of not like connected to why you do things, because you really should be doing things for one purpose only. It makes you happy or whatever reason you think you value in life. Like you should do those things for that reason. Once it becomes like, hey, I'm dressing this because these 10 other people think it's cool, then it's like you no longer know why you're doing that anymore. You kind of, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I feel like now looking back at it, it's like so much conditioning has happened that it's like I really want to find out who I really originally was, like before all of that, who like just enjoyed me. You know, and I think like it takes so much years of just like digging back 1, 2, 3, 4 to find that person.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's so deep. I mean, at this point, it's almost impossible to really find that person, because just I think one thing that I think a lot about is like to use the word gay to offend somebody, like how much that just completely molds the person that you become. You know, to where like so many things are just totally unlooked at because you can't be called gay.
Yeah.
You know, that is like the biggest insult in the book. And it has conditioned almost all men I can think of.
To become like hard and cold and like
so
you try and be as ungay as possible.
Yeah, ungay. Literally, yes, as ungay as possible. It's like if you remove that one insult, the amount of less conditioning that you'll instill on people is probably nuts. Unless there's another word that takes over.
Yeah, no, I mean honestly, I think nowadays I've been trying to undo some of that that work that I did in like my younger days by like making kind of nice comments to men sometimes. I'm like, yeah, that guy's looking kind of good.
Yeah.
I'm like, call me sus if you want. It is what it is.
Yeah, big facts. I think a word I've heard a lot used recently is simp. I think people have been using that to kind of like demean others and.
Yeah.
Yeah, the conditioning thing is definitely huge because you'd ideally want to. I mean, when I'm thinking about it, I want to be the type of person that never instills what I think the world should look like on you.
Yeah.
You know, because it's so important, but I still do not understand this yet. That what I believe is right is not actually right. To like be able to distance yourself from your thoughts like that is super important, and I feel like then only you can be capable of having like use good conversations with people where you can actually learn. You know, as long as I'm like tied, like me as a human being, I'm tied with my ideas and thoughts.
Yeah.
It's like I will never be able to switch them just superfluously, you know, because they're me and I can't change me. But if they're just thoughts and this is me, then I can just pick and choose which ones I like, which ones I don't, at what points I want to.
Yeah.
You know, and I think like that's something I want to work on eventually. So it's like just because I think this is cool doesn't mean I'm going to push that on you.
Yeah.
You know, but that takes a lot of work and definitely a lot of unlearning to do.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that also ties into what we were talking about with how difficult it is to talk about politics nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, politics and like your political beliefs are so tied to your sense of identity nowadays that if you find someone who has a clashing sense of identity, you're just yelling at each other for no reason, right? No one's gonna change their mind.
That is crazy, actually. What I just said there, I normally didn't think. That was the first time I ever really thought. I really like pictured that in my head, where I was like, now have and you know escaped being caught by the prison system or something like that doesn't make you good.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, so I think like how religion has played a huge role in kind of creating these like what you can and can't do is pretty interesting too. Like each religion subscribes a whole different set of kind of like this ethical guidelines. So it's interesting to see how the country's politics kind of interplay with like different religions, you know, like America's politics correlate more with Christianity as opposed to like Indian politics which correlate more with Hinduism, you know, and it's kind of cool to see how like they work together.
Like Indian religion and culture, but like, I mean, I'm probably not gonna pray and give blessings to a statue, but I mean, I still do appreciate what I got out of it.
That is cool. Yeah, I do. I think for me, one of the bigger ones that I've personally been looking more skeptically at is kind of just the idea that if you break some rules, as we were talking earlier, you are a bad person. You know, I think like this idea of like, I think heaven and hell is kind of what has put that at the forefront of everything. You know, like I don't know how people really. I was talking to my dad about it. I was like, I feel like the idea of heaven and hell is kind of what scares a lot of people into acting a type of certain way. You know, you kind of believe, and same with karma. I feel like even though like many people aren't Hindu, I feel like that concept of, oh hey, if I do good now, you know, something else in the future, you know, something might happen that will return, or even now when people are saying manifestation and blah 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 blah, it's kind of just like that idea of, hey, if I do good now, good will probably come in the future, has kind of is a large reason why a lot of people quote unquote do good things.
Yeah.
Because it is kind of interesting. It's like when it comes to being like when doing charity or it comes to doing these other types of kind acts, why is a good question, you know?
Yeah.
And I think just because it feels good is not enough of a reason to do things, you know?
You think? I think that it is. I mean, like what's the alternative? Like, you need to come up with like a strong justification for all your actions.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's better just do what you feel good and be happy.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
But like, the thing is, like, without that justification, a lot of acts become okay if feeling good is the driving factor.
Sure.
You know, a
Yeah.
lot of like impermissible acts, and I think one of the bigger things is like trying to delay gratification. Delaying gratification becomes almost impossible if you're trying to just do what feels good at that moment. You know, and I think like when you try to live a life of where you're, you know, rejecting a lot of activities from your life, you have to find justification outside of feeling good to do that. You know, 'cause I feel like this idea of putting pleasure at the front of everything makes doing things like very just rash, very easy to do.
Yeah.
You know, so I've been having a hard time like trying to figure out like how important is pleasure, how important is really feeling good, like
Yeah.
in that moment. So that's where. But what do you think?
I think it's like a balance of like yeah, I don't know. I guess it's just it just feels like a journey that every person kind of has to figure out like what to you, like how much is your life going to be based on purpose? How much do you want to like balance your like usual quest for purpose with like whatever you want to do for pleasure?
Yeah. It is an interesting journey. And I think that's why these conversations are really fun to have, because it's like now I'll be able to look back and be like, what did I think about good and bad when I was 22?
Yeah,
And it's
definitely.
like, it is something that's going to change every year. 5 years from now, if you ever come back and watch this video, we're going to be like, look at these motherfuckers, they don't know shit. These
Yeah.
dumbasses don't know nothing. Look, they don't even know what's going to happen. And that's why it's kind of cool, because it's like, but one thing I did really get from this that I do want to, hopefully, when I watch this back in the future, like really make sure this is highlighted, is because you're doing them to really lose yourself in feeling that you're good, or you're like a superior human being, or you're like a great person. Because
Yeah.
you just by yourself are amazing. And I think like that's something that I need to constantly remind myself, like, hey, I'm not amazing because I'm better than others, I'm just amazing because.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that distinction, whether it's being good, whatever it is super important to me. That way you can just like chill, you know?
Yeah.